So I'm currently a French teacher in the primary sector. I started my career as a classroom teacher, teaching multi-age classrooms on the Gold Coast. I then went west to Charleville, where I taught preschool via School of the Air, which you know you can teach when you can teach 5-year-olds how to do a relay with batons in their hallways and radio kits connected to their ears. Yes. And then headed up to Darwin. I did a stint on Groote Island. I was in Darwin for 3 years. Had a baby in Cairns, which was a nice 3 months off. And then we headed over to Vanuatu, where I worked as a Year 7 teacher for a year in the English International School. And then had another baby, and my idea of having babies and taking time off is to take 3 months and then go back and help them out with preschool, learning support, mileage reading, maths inclusion, and EALD, learning English as a second language. So then by the time my daughter was 3, I went to the French International School, where they were looking for an English teacher, and when I walked through to the interview and they realised that I was actually Australian and a French speaker, they decided to make a preschool immersion program that I would write and present for the first time in their school. As my husband says, I am the only person alive who gets jobs by accident. I'm on my 3rd one so far, so I'm doing pretty well with the whole accidental career thing. I was 3 years at the preschool immersion, where I also taught advanced English to early primary school and English support to the upper primary for students who arrived at the French International School having never studied French. We had such an intensive, never studied English. They had such an intensive English program that, of course, they were very far behind. So when I came to Australia, I decided to flip those skills and I became a French specialist here in Australia. And that's pretty much me in a nutshell. One of the things that I have been relearning on this journey, because every time you start in a new position, and this is the longest position I've ever held, it's 5 years. So I'm beating my record by 2 years at this point. Every time you start in a new position, you start relearning everything. And one of the things I very definitely had to relearn was how to make sure that my program was accessible to every child who walks through my door. Now, I can point out to you the noble reasons. Every child deserves an education. They deserve a quality education. Every child can learn. And having said that, I actually did associate in Vanuatu with a couple of children with Down syndrome who were bilingual. Mum was French, Dad was English. And they were bilingual in the home, they were bilingual at school. So it can be done for even quite serious intellectual impairments. It just takes longer. I can tell you that it is a legal requirement of your job that you include every child who walks through your door. None of that helps. What helps is knowing that if you have a program that is accessible to every child, that includes every child, it makes your job easier. If you plan for it, you prevent the sorts of things that make you feel like a failure and make them a problem in your classroom. You create an environment in your classroom that makes more capable students more confident in your skills and in their relationship with you. One of the powerful things that I relearned over the last few years is don't trust a person by how they treat people who have equal or more power than them. Trust a person based on how they treat those with less power. And if you think about the kid that can't express their emotions very well, can't express verbally very well, who has social issues, who comes to school hungry, who comes to school traumatised, those are children without power. If their classmates see them being treated in a way that this generation of aware and empathic children are, if they see that person being treated in a way that they feel is unfair or unjust, they won't trust you. And taking them on the journey of communicating in a foreign language is going to be so much harder for you. So I'm not a guru. As I said, I've been relearning this for 5 years, but this is the stuff that has made my life, my job, infinitely easier over the past 12 months to 2 years as I've learnt it. It has made the time my children spend in my classroom easier for them, and it has almost certainly increased the success of my program 100-fold via engagement and student uptake. So now that I've killed enough time for it all to work, let's get on with inclusion in the language classroom. So this is just a really lovely saying to get us in the mood. Equity is who has the keys to the room. Diversity is who is in the room. Inclusion is who feels welcome in the room. It's great that we say every child gets an education when they walk through the door, but if that child is sat in the corner and rethink for 45 minutes of every hour lesson, they're not welcome in that room, they're not getting that quality education. All we're teaching them is failure. So it's about making sure that every child is welcome in the room. And we're going to go through a few ways of making that possible with a minimum of input on our part. Lazy teaching. So this is where I wanted to just point out this idea of differentiation. There's a bit of stuff coming out about at the moment that we're saying differentiation is kind of write-only documents. We say we're doing it, but it's not actually possible to differentiate an individual program for 30 children. I don't know how many of you only get access to your children for half an hour a week, as many primary language teachers do. I'm just spoiled. I get an hour, which means over a year, by the time you take out sports festivals, absent days, Stedfords, all of the things that interrupt our programs, my kids would be lucky to get 36 hours in the French classroom. That is less than 2 weeks in the classroom. You know, so building that relationship takes a long time and it can be really tough. Knowing them enough to write an individualised program is a dream in 36 hours. That's a wonderful ambition, but it's not a realistic one. What I can do is plan for as many different needs as possible when I plan my program. I can choose my curriculum based on its ease of adaptation. Okay, so can I adapt my program? Can I use my program to welcome those children who need to move, to welcome those children who need time to think? Can I make the kid who's only good at his instrument feel good because we've got some music in the program? Can I make sure that this kid who's really here for social reasons, they're not here for academic. In fact, they don't even get an academic report card. They get a report card about how they participate. How can I support that child? How can I make sure that they've got a little buddy that's helping them? They've got something to do when our program goes too deep for them so that they're still gaining the skills that they need from their time in the classroom and still connect it to the language that I'm teaching. And that's why this has changed from differentiation to inclusion, because inclusion is possible. I can make those children feel that they're wanted and welcome in my room. And that addresses those needs that we're talking about today. And that's where we come to the UDL, the Universal Design for Learning. So as I was saying, we design our program for access. Does it have motion? Does it have spaced practice? Does it have multiple ways of children presenting knowledge? Are we giving them a chance to be assessed formatively as well as summatively? And especially in primary school, those formative assessments really reduce stress. I used to insist on a summative assessment every term. Of course, at the end of 10 weeks, they'd get their first exam, they'd get their first result. Half the class would be good at French, half the class would be bad at French, and I never got them back. So shifting my program to formative assessment, whereby my students are not actually aware most of the time that I am assessing them, removed all of that. What they get now is feedback. hey, you need to adjust this thing, you're working on this now. But they don't get a score that gives them a stress point and makes them feel like this journey is about scores. What they get is, I'm on the road to better communication. So reflecting on which is more useful, a building design that has to be constantly retrofitted. So we build our hospital, and it's a great big square building, and it's got a beautiful entrance, which is stairs. And then we realise that people with wheelchairs and on ambulance stretchers can't get into our hospital. So we build a ramp. But that means we've got to cut out the stairs and build the ramp. And then we realise that the elevator doors aren't wide enough when somebody's in a stretcher. So we have to put in a new special elevator that can only be used by stretchers. And then we realise that some of the rooms are really dark and certain people can't see their charts when they're in them. So we have to put in better lighting. By now we've spent millions of dollars, huge amounts of effort, to now have a hospital building that doesn't really quite suit the needs of any of our patients. And that's what our one-size-fits-all programs look like. So we come up with our program that we've written, and because we've spent so many hours working on it, we're pretty dedicated to it. And then we take it into the classroom and we go, oh, but Billy really doesn't like speaking in front of others. So, okay, I'll have to write a thing where he can do it on an iPad. And such has got intellectual impairment, so I've got to have a little colouring activity for her to do when we're doing our writing task. And such is, I don't know, scared of dog puppets, so we've got to have a cow that day. How much of a waste of time is that for me? That I've already spent a week of my holidays doing my program, and then every day, at the end of the day, I have to go through in my head who needs what and how do I have to change my program. All that's doing is adding stress to myself and to my students when it doesn't work. So I take curriculum and I look for the things that make those kids welcome. Okay, so it calls for learning about a dog, but some kids are allergic to it. Let's have a bunch of puppets, and then they can learn the name of the animal that they love. And that's what they can do. Or let's include some music there. Let's have a motion break. Let's have a wriggle break. Let's transition children really well. You might find that having a very short, simple warm-up is all some of your kids need, especially if they're coming in from play break. They need that moment to cool down, calm down, and leave whatever drama happened in the playground behind before they can engage in what you're doing. Anyone whose school has been on a heavy wellbeing track over the last 2 years may have heard of the third space, and that's all about how we transition from one activity to the other. So that 1 or 2 minutes out of your hour of giving kids some mental space to come in and be ready for your lesson can actually make your whole lesson so much more efficient. And that's where that building that is designed with ramps and wide doors and quality lighting becomes efficient and becomes useful to every user. Saves us money, saves us time, saves us stress. Differentiation, reasonable adjustments and inclusion. So this is again where the idea of differentiation, I think in the next few years we'll find, is one of those words we've kind of shoved in the cupboard. What is currently being released by EQ is the idea of reasonable adjustments. I really like this because it's where I was going with differentiation anyway. It is not reasonable for me to have an entire program written for the 10 classes that I teach in 3 days every week, because I'll have 3 in this class that need something different and 2 in this class that have something different and 1 in another class that needs something different. That's not reasonable for me to keep up with 300 students. And I've got a light load, I'm part-time. Some of you would have 500. It is not reasonable to expect me to have individual programs for all of those students, but I can make reasonable adjustments. I can make those adjustments simple to implement. They should be beneficial or neutral at the very least to all students, and they should disadvantage no one. So it's not that I'm giving Billy this and that means Sarah can't have that. Sarah at the very least is it neutral, may even benefit from it. And it should have a big payoff for for you and for the student with the minimum of effort on your part. It might be as simple as remembering a kid's birthday because no one else does. If you're the teacher that knows that, you've got them. Again, professional responsibility versus what's possible. There are some things we can't control. There are some things we just can't do, and there are some people we may never click with. What we can do is keep trying and not give up on ourselves or on those kids. And you know what? They might, years later, say, God, I hated French, wasn't real keen on you, but I remembered how hard you made me work. And they remember funny little things that we did together and stuff like that. And what we can do is look at success for every student. For some students, that's an A. For some, that's they managed to stay in the classroom for a full hour. For some, that's not only did they stay in the classroom, they smiled today. So what is success for that child? And that's when our reasonable adjustments came in. Now, I believe this is being recorded, so there's a really lovely little alphabet up there for you. It's just something that helps us reflect on it. It's nothing in there is new to any teacher. But we get in our ruts. We get stuck on what we're doing. We've been doing it forever, and you know, whatever fashion rolled around last year has sort of thrown that baby out with the bathwater. But we can have a look at little things like that and go, oh yeah, of course, movement breaks. I'd forgotten about those. Let's do some clicking or some clapping or some standing up. Whole class differentiation. So this is where we get into those little adjustments, big impact, minimum effort on my part. So here's the part where I kind of go, coffee break. Visuals and artefacts around my room. They are there, sorry, they're not appearing. So visuals and artefacts around my room. Primary school teacher, we love glitter, we love posters, okay? But, so I'm also big on trying to get stuff that the kids recognise. So family is a really hard concept to get across if you're trying to use an immersion method, which is what I try to do. Every kid of this generation recognises Peppa Pig. They know who the family are. So I use that. When I was a kid, it was Bart Simpson. Okay, that was what we did. So using that stuff that they can connect to straight away. But more than anything, these visuals and artefacts have worked for students who might be having a stressful day or a tough time, and they're just not going to engage in my program that day. But what they can do is touch these things. They can trace the lines of that family tree. They can look at postcards that I and friends have sent from francophone countries around the world. There's photos of my first trip to France, which was last year. So sharing that with the kids was really, really special. And so they can read the little captions that I put on the photos for them. They can see that, they can touch that. We've got tea towels, we've got sarong, we've got maps. I'm working on a little market stall at the moment, so that there'll be cereal boxes and tins and things like that as well. Maybe they're not learning about how to say the names of their family and introduce their dog and describe how many legs it's got this week, but what they are doing is still engaging in that language. They're still targeting French. And maybe I lost them that week, but next week they'll come back and go, actually, it was really chill in there last week. I can do this now. I probably had 6 months of that with a student last year. High stress, very high anxiety, and he spent 6 months on the fringes of my room. And the first day, it was very much back to me, rocking, but tracing things, touching things, feeling the outlines of things. By the end of the term, it was sideways, and he would be touching it, but I could see his ear, like a little radar, listening to what I was saying. This year, Year 6, he's had 1 year of French with me. front row, hand up, having a go. Whenever that kid has something to say in my French lesson, I get goosebumps. And so does his mum, because she didn't think it was possible. So that's me showing off a little bit. I'm really proud of him. But it was literally that simple. Having some attractive things on my wall that this kid got a sensory input that he enjoyed from, and being able to filter out, being able to judge, is he off task or is he just off today and he needs this? And that filtering is something I've really had to learn. Yeah, he's learning, but he's doing it at his pace. He'll get there. Don't worry about his grade, just let him do it. And now I can grade him. I can do things with him. Gestural language. I'm not sure how many of you would have heard of the AIM method, Accelerated Integrated Method. I'm not here to advertise it. What attracts me to it is the fact that every word is associated with a gesture, a kind of sign language. It means that even when we're doing verbal review, sitting down with our legs crossed on the floor, there's motion. They don't have to use it, but they can. And so they get that kinesthetic connection whenever they want to. It's also, I find, a really good primary program because there's lots of dance and music and story integrated. But the gestural language is the real key to that program. If you're not interested in the AIM, I definitely recommend that you look at gestures to help students make meaning in your room, but also to really engage those kids that associate learning with movement. Thinking time. We all know about it, but we're in a hurry. And sometimes you've got those kids that are throwing the answers at you, they're yelling at you, they're putting their hands up, and it can feel like you're digging teeth to get an answer out of anybody else. But even in your own head, just count to 5, count to 10, and watch those hands double. Watch the kid who maybe still didn't put their hand up, but you're pretty sure they've got the answer and you can talk them through it now. Ignore the hands, just say, oh, I want to hear from this person. Okay, that thinking time is invaluable. And we all know it. I'm not sure how many of you are teaching in a language that you had to learn, but we remember the days when we translated every sentence in our head. Okay, I still cheat sometimes and watch movies with subtitles because I'm tired. Okay, imagine them. Seating plan. Cannot tell you how much my kids hate the seating plan. If there's ever going to be a rebellion in my classroom, it's going to be the seating plan. I don't actually have furniture in my room. I'm in a temporary space that's get used for multiple things. So there's no chairs, there's no desks. There kind of is furniture, but it's around the edges. And so the kids were hiding under furniture, hiding behind chairs, sitting on stacks of chairs. They were hiding behind a TV that doesn't even belong to the school. It's just stored there by a community group. It was just a nightmare. So 10 minutes, the beginning of every lesson, was Madame Galligan's Nag Fest. It was a nightmare. The whole thing was negative. They resented it because blah, 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 choice and la. The seating plan comes from Anita Archer. She is the explicit education guru of the moment, and she's really, really worth reading up on if you haven't encountered her before. One of the things I took away from her was this idea of seating plans. Kids get lots of choice. They don't need it about where they sit. They'll get over it, and they do. So my seating plan is based on several things. Year 5 boys and girls hate each other. It's war. So all boys and girls are partners. There's no boy-boy partners, there's no girl-girl partners. Boys and girls get partnered. We're going to get over that. We're students. Now, second one is ability. The students are not paired according to what we used to call peer tutoring. Really smart kid, really low kid. Doesn't work. They get paired according to a maximum 1 grade advantage between the two. Sometimes it might be one's a really good speaker and listener, one's a good reader and writer. Pop them together, you get both strengths. Sometimes it's an A with a B, or a B with a C, or a C with a D. That one step is what they can explain without getting bored, without losing their partner. Children are not trained teachers. So an A student is not going to comprehend why the D student doesn't just get it. and they're just going to do the work, and the D kid will put their hands in their lap and go, oh, thank goodness I've got this partner. No, but neither of them get any benefit, because you see the eye rolls when you partner those really strong kids with those low kids. But if you put a C and a D together, they kind of know who's slightly better than the other. But they're not so enormously better that they can never catch up. They can sort of go, hey, she thinks I'm good enough to get as good as this kid. And you know what? Suddenly they are good enough to get as good as this kid. And what the C child can explain is just within the reach of extension for that D child. And of course, they get the benefit of explaining something on a deeper level. This started out as a behaviour thing. It's had a massive benefit on work ethic as well as on academic outcomes. I found, surprisingly enough, it reduced stress at the beginning of the lesson, not just mine. Madame Galligan's NAGFest got cancelled, but theirs, especially the kids that came in from playtime, because they'd come in hot and bothered and in the middle of play mode, and they couldn't break out of it. And they couldn't make smart decisions about, is my friend a good friend or a work friend? And things like that. This relieved all of that decision making. You don't have to make a decision, you know where to sit. Sit down, cool down, we'll sing a song, Madame Galligan will start teaching in 30 seconds, we're all good. And that reduction of stress actually streamlined the start of our lessons to an enormous degree. Assigned groups. Oh, yeah, of course. That was almost a disaster. So assigned groups had the same effect. I used to try, especially when we did plays or poetries and things, I used to try and give, big roles to the A kid and small roles to the D kid, and they hated it. The D kid wouldn't do anything the whole time. The A kid had everything to do. When it came to play day, the D kid didn't know their 3 lines, and the A kid was telling them their 3 lines as well as whole play. Put them in likability groups. Sure, the D kids are still sitting there with the script on the day and their accents are atrocious, but they've got a costume on and they're using a funny voice and they're engaging in the language. And halfway through the play, one of them goes, oh, it's a house. He learned some French. Okay, that's okay. It's fine. He made progress and he's shown it to me. The A kids are there, and of course they've got their beautiful costumes. They know the whole thing by heart. The preppies think they're the heroes of the world. So do they. And they haven't spent 6 weeks being frustrated. They got to shine and no one took it away from them. So those assigned groups have been, yeah, I can get a bit preachy about those. Formative assessment, as I mentioned earlier, has reduced a lot of the tension in my classroom. All those little written exams that I used to think I had to rely on. It helps that I've been in the same school for 5 years. The first year I kind of needed it because I didn't even know the other year 5, 6 teachers I was working with, let alone the 300 children I met for the first time. It was huge. I needed evidence. Now I'm teaching 5 years later, younger brothers and sisters, cousins. There's knowledge and there's relationship. Okay, so that makes it easier. As far as formative assessment goes, I get a photo roll. So every time I mark the roll, I'm seeing their face. That helps me learn their names really fast. Underneath the roll, I have 5 boxes. At the bottom of the roll, I say what each box is, and they get a number, 0 to 4. 4's advanced, 0 is not attempted. So they don't know the code other than 4 is good and 0 is not so great. But they don't see the code. What they do see is Madame Galligan getting out the magic clipboard every now and then during a game where we're going around and doing this week's question or something. They see me write something down and smile and they go, oh, I must have got it right, she ticked me off. That's a 0. They think it's great, it's done. Every now and then I do warn them that something is going to be an assessment piece. For example, a big play presentation. Yes, I'll be assessing you, but I'm not assessing you on the play. I'm assessing you every week when I walk around with my clipboard. If you have a bad week, be ready for next week. So they know the clipboard's coming around, she's watching us. Okay? But they don't get a number on a page that says you're bad at learning languages. What they get is a chat with Madame. that says, hey, I noticed you learnt that line. Let's work on this word because you're really having trouble with that one. Let's practice it. So here's my progress. Here's what I do next. Next week I'll be better. That's what they want to know. That's actually useful information to them. And that's where, again, formative assessment, amen, sister. Tint your screen. You want a lazy, easy way to make kids feel included? Tell them why. Does anyone know why we tint our screens? Dyslexia. Pale blue, pale green create a better line, basically. They can see it better. Now, unfortunately today, because we've had to load this onto a different computer, it's showing in a basic font. But what I also use is Open Dyslexic. It's a free font. Write it down now. Open Dyslexic. Download it on your computer. It is probably the thing that your kids will appreciate most. So you get the kids, I can't do this, I'm dyslexic, so I can't learn languages. And that's when you say, well, A, my brother's dyslexic and he learned French and Japanese as a kid, so that was in the 80s, suck it up. Second of all, because my brother's dyslexic, I tint my screen green so that you can see it better. All of my worksheets, and it's been a 4-year process, are now in Open Dyslexic if it is possible. Yes, I've had to recreate a lot of wheels, but once it's done, it's saved.
What font?
Open Dyslexic.
Yes, but colour of the script as against the background.
I use black script, but a tinted background. And it was really funny because one of our girls she's smart. This girl has got a phenomenal memory. When we were kids, she probably wouldn't have been picked up as being dyslexic because her memory is that good. You give her something, we read it as a class and she memorises it so she doesn't have to read it again. So she's brilliant verbally. Ask her to complete a sentence. She's got to sharpen her pencil and she's got to clean this up and she needs to go to the toilet. It's so hot, I need a drink, you know. And she came to me one day and she just said, I'm really not good, because she didn't realise I didn't know that I knew she was dyslexic. She said, I'm really not good with this much text. And I said, I put that in Open Dyslexic. I thought that would really help you. And she went, of course. Went off and did the whole thing. 20 sentences. She's never mentioned it again. 300 kids, I don't know. I can't remember to do 3 dyslexic ones and 3 non-dyslexic ones. It was so much easier for me to spend 10 minutes every week going, what's that worksheet? Retype that in Open Dyslexic, add a picture that they can colour in if they need a chill out break, print it off. Everybody got the same thing. What I never expected was that my students' spelling in French across the board improved. Because what was happening was that they couldn't predict spelling. For those of you who don't speak French, il, I-L, means he or it. But if you put it at the beginning of a sentence in Times Roman, it's a capital I and a lowercase l. All of my students were spelling il, double L. Open Dyslexic differentiates both of them. Suddenly my students are spelling that 2-letter word correctly, and a lot of others as well. So that's where we come back to that idea of every child, even my most capable students, were benefited by this really simple, reasonable adjustment that I made. But the students who needed it most had the biggest benefit. And some of that benefit is confidence. This person has provided something specifically that meets my needs. And ultimately that's what they need to hear. Okay, maybe it's a placebo effect. There's a lot of research behind dyslexic fonts that they do work. But when you're a 12-year-old kid, you don't care about research. What you care about is that someone did it for you. If you can't get dyslexic font, you may find if you're an EQ teacher and you want it on your school laptop that it's easier to download at home away from the nanny network. It worked on mine, but it doesn't work on others. But if you're really stuck, use Comic Sans. Apparently that's a good replacement if you need it. Mnemonics and think alouds. As my boss says, specialist teachers live in the space of explicit teaching. But sometimes we need to remind ourselves of that. Not every kid gets it just because you've shown them. So we go through that idea of thinking through this process. So we say things like in a jumbled sentence, oh, now, what's the English knowledge that I can use to figure out what the first word's going to be? What punctuation knowledge do I have? Year 5, 6 kids are thrilled to tell you need to look for the capital letter. They love knowing that the full stop goes at the end. And then you can move on to, well, the first word's a noun. That's usually followed by a verb. Can we find a verb in here? And then suddenly they've got a process that helps them put a sentence together. I'm sorry, speaking from French. I'm not sure about Japanese constructions, but they've got a process for putting things together that uses knowledge they already have, and it links it all together, and it makes them figure it out. And so those think alouds, the little mnemonics, French has masculine and feminine genders, so you make fun of them. Okay, so la bouche is feminine, le nez is masculine. That's because girls are talkative and boys stink. They never get masculine and feminine wrong again, okay? Yes, it's sexist, that's why it's fun. But those mnemonics and think alouds, singing, music, all of that really helps. Anything that aids their memory. Sorry, that little graphic was for the working partners, and that's probably something I should have addressed, was that idea of course, it makes think, pair, share, doing an activity together so easy. Because they've got their, you can see on my seating plan, it's colour-coded. If they're next to you and they're the same colour, they're your partner. So we don't waste any time looking for a partner. There's no shouting across the room in English, will you be my partner? Because you turn to A or B, and those partners are numbered as well, so they know whose turn is first. You'll notice that some of them are in groups of 3. Sometimes it's an odd number, sometimes it's a support reason. So we might have kids who have very high absenteeism. Why should their partner miss out all the time? So you put them in a group of 3. When Joe Bloggs is absent, it doesn't matter. When he's there, he's got 2 people to help him catch up. You might, as I do, have a child with Down syndrome. She just wants to be a part of it. 2 buddies is like winning the lottery to her. And they love showing her what they're doing or teaching her how to say the words and say it back to them. When we do a writing task and she doesn't have the fine motor skills for that, she gets a puzzle that matches words and pictures. So she does that, and she's getting the fine motor and spatial practice that she actually requires, but the puzzle's in French. And so then her buddies, who are usually pretty high achievers, get a real kick out of reading the words to her. So she's then getting the social stuff that she needs. And so that's why we have the 3s. And that idea of explaining to someone something, that pride and that opportunity to do that, really, really does increase their confidence in the language. They feel like they've got someone on their side. Something for everyone. And this is where we go back to that universal design for learning. Okay, so when I sit down to plan my term, what's everybody doing? And I can do things in groups. What are my kids who need motion doing? What are my kids who are visual doing? What are my musical kids doing? And then I can sort of go, oh yeah, this person will like that, and I may need to consider that that noise will be hard for this person and things like that. But basically in all of my lessons I try to plan for motion and play in every lesson. Sorry, these might come up in a couple of funny orders. Musical practice and repetitions. So sometimes they just need to memorise some words so they've got them. I started putting them into rap music and beats. And I'll show you one in a moment. But basically, you can go on Free Beats, I think is the website, or just Google Free Beats to download. You can also buy off iTunes popular music of the moment without the lyrics. So you buy the karaoke version of Sunshine in My Pocket, the one they were all singing from the Trolls movie a couple of years ago. And then you can put not only words they need to remember, but whole sentences that show how to use those words with pictures that speak to them and explain it, and suddenly they're rocking out a rap. They're not doing a vocab repetition, but they're getting that vocab repetition that you need them to get. So then you've got music and motion, and we all know that music has phenomenal difference for memory. Spaced practice. Introduce at the beginning of the lesson, do your activities, take a break, come back to it. Come back to it again a week later, then give it a break for 3 weeks. Let it soak into the mind and bring it back. Let it soak in and bring it back. So we're all about creating memories that they can refer to and use to scaffold. Quiet reflective work. So there's a time when maybe we're writing, maybe we're drawing, maybe we're on whiteboards, but it's not the whole class moving in motion. It's time for it to soak in. I'm not real good at that one. I like motion all the time, so I have to really make sure I have some quiet time in my classrooms. Flipped lessons, and that's why Screencast-O-Matic is up there. Screencast-O-Matic. It is free. Screen hyphen cast hyphen o hyphen matic. You'll have to download it at home. EQ will block it. But once you've got it on your computer, you can use it whenever you like. So what Screencast-O-Matic does is it films your screen. So I can put up my grammar activity or my skill set that I want them to learn. And I can do my think aloud and I can record it. And I can show them highlights and I can manipulate the document. My face is still on it. I'm talking directly to them. Flipped lessons do some fantastic things. I load mine to Language Perfect, where my students can download them and use them as many times as they need to get the concept. So we've got revision for the kids that just need extra explanation. I can put the kid who just arrived from New Caledonia and who has been educated in the French system on flipped lessons and on Language Perfect, and they can continue their French education without having to learn how to say je m'appelle, my name is. I can also use flipped lessons. Sometimes you can pop a kid on an iPad with headphones. They can't interrupt me. They can't make a cheeky comment. They can't put their hand up and ask to go to the toilet because it's a computer. And suddenly all that power that they get from those interruptions has been disconnected. So whether they stop the video 5 times or once, you're actually able to get some teaching done. So I really loved flipped lessons, and Screencast-O-Matic is a really great way to do it. The other type of thing I use Screencast-O-Matic for is read alouds. Does everybody remember listening posts? You know, the big headphones and the book that would read the story to you? Kids still love them. And I do mine in French, so we'll have our story or our play or our song. Oh, they're so lucky Madame Galligan sings to them. So we'll be working on trauma next time. But on Screencast-O-Matic, I can actually highlight the words as I read them, like the little ladybird bouncing across the words. I can film myself doing the gestures as I say them, so the kids can connect that word-to-word recognition and help with their reading, and really prevent some of those pronunciation atrocities that we get when we send a piece of paper home to practice and they come back and they've mangled it. Okay, so that can really prevent that sort of problem where we have to then reteach it all. Encouragement, 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 encouragement. This is encouraging. Boys love this one. Because, you know, you and I just had a secret thing that I'm a winner. You know, the boys love that. And a lot of kids actually really don't like even having something done well pointed out, because they do not want to be seen in the classroom. They want you to see them, but they don't want anyone else to see them. But if you can get that smile, if you can get that thumbs up, that's great. We all know that, I always get them mixed up, but extrinsic rewards are a bit out at the moment. However, if it's what's needed to get your kids engaged, give them the crutch. My guys have a point system. I'm the only teacher in the school that's got it, so it's golden. Because all the other we're intrinsic only. So they come to Madame Galligan and they get a point for doing the right thing, and they think they're awesome. The prize, once a term, whoever wins gets to sit on a chair. They fight for it. They fight for it. And so they're put in teams, and they only get a point if they speak French. So they get a point if they have helped the class learn, because they've spoken in French and they've modelled French. They get a point if they've spoken in French, and therefore they were listening and they know how to do it. They get a point if they've spoken in French, and therefore they were on task. So a lot of things need to happen before they get that point, and that's explained to them. Every now and then, if it's a really tricky thing that they can explain in English, they'll get a point because, hey, you really know your French grammar and you can explain it to someone, that's a point. But generally it's only for speaking in French. Sometimes it's because they spoke in French when the whole class, we do a lot of choral French so that no one has to speak in front of the class for a while. If one kid leads it, they spoke in French, they get a point. What they've done is shown leadership, and they know that, but the point is for speaking French. So I've got lots of levels. It might be that the kid who's never spoken until week 3 has said bonjour. You spoke French, you get a point. Or it might be the kid that I know is going straight across the road to the French immersion at Benoa High. We've got a really great pathway for our guys. Has just spoken to me in an entire sentence to describe a photo with almost no support. You spoke in French, you get a point. But from bonjour to a full sentence, there's a hugely broad range of ability there. Both of them got the encouragement they need to take the next step. And that's when encouragement becomes part of the inclusion journey. I haven't even looked at the time. How am I doing? Oh, this one's... Oh, so here's the fun part. I brought videos. This is one of the little things that we do in our French club. We spend a term making little videos, and they get to choose what they're going to make their video about each time. This particular one was about colours. So the girls were all sitting in a circle. I had a group of girls in this particular one, and they were asking their puppet their favourite colour. This little girl was the last one, so everyone had taken all the good colours, and she had one of our new puppets who was rainbow, so she wanted to say, my favourite colour is rainbows. So that's what we did, and it wasn't part of the vocabulary, it wasn't something we'd learnt, but she wanted it. Hopefully it works. So what she's saying in French is, j'aime les arcs-en-ciel, which is I like rainbows in French. But it was play-based, it was driven by her. And she's not one of my top students. She just likes puppets and videos. That's why she came along. It'll work this time? Okay. We'll try it. Oh. Sorry. So you can see that she's not super confident. Okay, but she remembers arc-en-ciel, it's arc-en-ciel, but she'll say, oh, that arc-en-ciel, because that's what she remembers. It came from her, she wanted it. And mostly that was just to show you the motion, play, something that matters to them. She's not one of my top students at all. She'd be very, very average, very middle of the road. But right there, she chose to extend herself. She didn't take the easy path and copy the kid in front of her, which is what you would expect a C student to do. Oh, they said, I like blue, I'll say I like blue, because then I know I'm going to get it right. Because she didn't need to get it right. She was playing. And she was figuring it out for herself. And that's where that motion and play sense is really important. So, so few things in there that I want to show you. That was the gestural language that we use. As you can see, when you put it to music, there were kids moving. They were treating it as a dance. They were dancing seated. I think one of the students in that class is not actually allowed to dance in front of males. So we did a lot of our dancing seated that year. Because what she was allowed, we totally cheated. I said, oh, are you allowed to do nursery rhymes with actions, like for babies? Oh, yeah, no worries. So all our dancers were seated that year because she was doing nursery rhymes for babies. That's all she needed, and she did all of it because what the value was for her was included. So we've got the gestural language there for those kids that use motion. Our school has a very strong music program, so our kids are very heavily linked to it. And that really helps them feel included because we have so many kids that feel bright when music comes on. You would have seen the little smiles and the nod raises and the little smiles, the little connections that happen. So again, that's play-based. And that's also one of our musical repetitions that becomes a rap. So they were learning prepositions. Sadly, the day I took the video was, of course, the day I had technical difficulties. Normally it's on a screen like this and the photo's yay big. And you try and get photos that have an emotional connection for the kids, whether it makes them laugh, whether it makes them feel sad, they remember it because they connect to it. So there's things like a kid inside a cubby house because they can relate to that. There's a kid in front of the White House because it's easily recognised. For those who don't speak French, je suis sur un chien, I am on a dog. It was a child with special needs who had a service dog, and one of the service dog's job was to be his footstool. And so he stands on this dog to reach things, and the kids were shocked by it. But they remember it, and they all know what sur means now. So those are fun. I keep doing it. I'm so sorry, Catherine.
Don't apologise.
Now we come to the really fun ones. You can make as many booklets and adjustments, and you can be the kindest, most wonderful, most up-to-it teacher in the world, and you're going to be a kid that goes, I hate you, I hate school, I hate French, and I'm not doing it. They're on their own terms, kids. And you know what? It might not be the same kid every week. It might be the kid who just found out mum and dad are getting a divorce and he just can't do it this week. It might be the kid who just found out her baby sister's got leukemia. And there's no way on earth you're going to pay her to stand in front of her class and give a presentation today. So, for those kids, we have the games and puzzles box. We have booklets filled with grammar and puzzles and activities. We have alternative assessments. We have negotiation. What can you do today? What can you tolerate? We have Language Perfect, Duolingo, and a YouTube channel so that they can access it on an iPad or a laptop if they need to. They can go home and do it. If today was a bad day, catch it up at home, it'll be okay. If mum comes in and says, they're just not coping, they're really hating it, I can say, well, listen, mum, there's this Language Perfect thing for homework that your kid hasn't done for 10 weeks. Why don't you hop on it with them? And suddenly that kid's Mum is like, oh, your teacher's been providing you with this support, let's use it. And suddenly you've got mum on side and kid on side. The negotiation one. What can you do? What can you tolerate? I told you about the young man before that was touching things. I had another young fellow who had noise sensitivity. Madame Galligan is not the quietest of teachers, and the French classroom is not a quiet place to be. And one of the kids' favourite games is singing the songs of the months faster and the months of the year faster and faster and faster. You have to stand up, do a funny dance move, and sit down when you hear your birthday month. We do it once a month for birthdays. He hated it so much. We used to joke about how much he loved my singing voice, and he would go, "No, I don't. I hate your singing voice." He really didn't like the noise. So he would spend that part of the lesson at the bottom of the stairs. By the end of year 5, he would spend that part of the lesson just outside the door, which had a really handy glass window in it. The forehead like this, glaring at me. When's that god-awful racket going to stop? And then I can come and learn some French. By the end of year 6, I was here, he was there, and he was singing. He did not do a funny dance move because it was beneath him, but he knew the months of the year. And that's when negotiation was so important. Of course he couldn't tolerate it, but he could learn the months of the year at home on Language Perfect. He could read them on the walls when he came in and things like that. He was never going to take an academic pathway in French. So I had to let go of his grade. I had to go, yeah, you know what? Failure for this kid isn't a D on his report card. It's never getting into my classroom. So there's the success. He gets into the classroom. Success for him was the day he told me, I feel pretty safe in your room. Because that is not a kid who trusts people, okay? The payoff for me, his little sister's in my room this year. Not only does she love French and work her guts out for me, when she goes on holidays, she collects all the French tourist brochures for Madame. So the effort I put into that kid 2 years ago is making my job easier now because I'm getting free resources. So that brings us very neatly back to, don't do it for them. Don't do it because you're told to. Don't do it because it's noble. Do it because it's easy. It makes their life easy, it makes your life easy, and it will make your program more successful, and it will guarantee the life of your program. And that's why we include people in this wonderful thing called languages. Thank you for your time.
Any questions? Anybody has?
Cathy, have you been a wanton minstrel and carried the games and the puzzles and the booklets and whatever else from room to room? Every half an hour? How did you do that?
I did it hourly. So like I said, I'm really spoiled. I got an hour, so that was a nice little break. Yes, I have done it. Listen, it was so much harder, and no, it wasn't as good. I had to rely a lot more on the class iPads and laptops for the games and the activities. Okay, you can go and do this today. I tended to have my backpack with my various folders, and in one of the folders would be a series of booklets with colouring in, puzzles, numbers and things like that. The box with the big puzzles and things was a thing I got once I got into my classroom. And that's something I had to really fight for. And as I said, I'm in a temporary classroom now because I won that fight. Because I just had to keep saying to my boss, I can't deliver what these kids need from my handbag. You know, and my office was up 2 flights of stairs. So it wasn't even a matter of a trolley, because the trolley was too heavy to get up the stairs and I had nowhere to keep it. So getting that across, these kids need a space that I can make feel safe, that I can include them in. Do not stop nagging your boss for that, because it's for your kids. It works. Yeah, that's all I can say. I had really good arm muscles and my step counter was always over 10,000. Catherine.
We've got a couple of people online, Christine and Nairi, said what a great presentation it was. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Very
Christina.
inspiring. It's answered a lot of questions that they had about inclusion. Nairi has commented that while she understands an academic grade is not valuable for all students, it's still a requirement and it can be demoralising.
Yeah. And do you know what? It can be in English and it can be in maths. We are not the only teachers who know that. And our principals know it and our deputies know it. I know some primary schools who do not give a grade for the first year of LOT learning. I'm unfortunately not one of them. They tend to be the schools that have multiple years of language. They might start in prep 1, 2, 3, so they can afford a year where it's a language and culture program where students learn how to learn a language and therefore they're not assessed on it. They're given an effort rating, a participation rating and a description of the types of activities they did. And it sets the kids up to succeed because my children were in a school like that. My children were not taught French because they were sent to a school that had a LOT program that was really, really strong. So they were in a school like that and yeah, at the end of sensei thinks I'm wonderful. I got an A. You were really good at origami, honey. It was very cute. But it set her up to succeed. She's actually getting an A in Japanese now. Whereas if you've only got 2 years, you've got to give them a grade. But what you can do is grade proof them. And that's by making them feel like the grade doesn't matter to you either. So when they walk into your room, you're pleased to see them. When you're walking around the school, you want to find out things about them. You can have your little in-jokes with them. They can take photos to help you set up your PowerPoints and your slideshows and your examples. You have a French club. You run festivals, you run movie days, you send Mother's Day cards, Father's Day cards, all of that good teaching stuff. What you do is you make them feel good about the fact that they're learning it. Then you let the report card go home, hopefully 2 days before the holidays, so that they've got 2 weeks to forgive you before term 3 starts. And then they come back and you smile at them again and you tell them, who's ready to learn French again? Yeah! And they forget about their grades. They do. One of the big advantages I found is the new electronic report cards. I think parents aren't reading them to their kids anymore because they don't seem to get them. They get emailed. We used to get the little book that went home and you'd already, torn open the envelope before you gave it to mum and dad. But it's emailed straight to mum and dad now. Half the time the kids haven't read it. But as I said, you have to give them a grade, but you can grade proof them.
Another question?
Yes.
What year levels do you offer to use Language Perfect? Which year levels are you using?
Language Perfect themselves would not recommend it below grade 3.
Yeah.
And for year 3, I would only recommend it for kind of vocab review, little lists of 10 words. I use it for 5, 6, and I try not to overuse it because so many of the high schools use it very heavily. Benoa High in particular, across the road from us, has a very strong relationship with Language Perfect, and so they use it across subjects because they use Education Perfect as well. It is great for setting up things like competitions. You can set up inter-school competitions with the next suburb over. I don't know how many of you are from the Gold Coast, but when I was a kid, the Ashmorons hated the Narangatangs. Okay, so if you set up a competition it wouldn't even have to be the same language, in languages against those two schools, you would have an epic battle for the ages, okay? They would want to prove who was better. We also participate in the Language Perfect World Championships, and one of the things I do to make sure everyone is included in that is that we book a lab week. I have to do that on the school calendar, so I'm not disrupting my colleagues' time in the lab. But we get that week, every French lesson goes into Language Perfect. And I had one little fella who is on an ICP for everything. And he's not little, he's taller than me, but he's a great big teddy bear. And he comes up and he says, "Oh, I'm really sad because I want to be in that competition. I know I'm not good enough." And I said to him, "Dude, you just did the competition. You won 50 points. You helped your class take the lead." "Did I?" And he walked out and he told his mum that night that he was in the competition. So just that, making sure that every kid gets to have a go. That's what Language Perfect is great for, because I can manage that in my school.
One of our online people grew up in Ashmore. Ashmoron, hilarious.
I was an Ashmoron. Hi. Any other questions? Excellent. Either I've bored you all silly and everyone's asleep, or I answered every question.
It's been very inspiring.
That was great, Cathy. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much. We got lots of
Thank you.
Cathy's on our Gold Coast.